My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. 3 years ago, I never would have believed that the house I grew up in, the house with my crayon marks still hidden behind the closet door, would one day become the center of a battle with my own mother. I always thought family meant safety. I thought no matter what happened out in the world, there was one place I could always come home to, but I was wrong. And what happened in that house still makes my hands shake when I think about it. This is the story of how my mother tried to take everything from me, and how the truth she never expected finally caught up with her. Growing up, our house on Maple Ridge Lane was everything to me. My father built a small reading nook under the stairs just for me. My mother, Diane, used to bake on Sunday mornings, and the whole house would smell like cinnamon. When my father passed away 6 years ago, something in our family shifted. He'd worked his whole life as an engineer, careful with money, careful with paperwork. He left behind more than grief. He left behind a house, some savings, and a will that none of us had actually read closely. I was 23 then, fresh out of college, grieving and trusting. My mother told me she'd handle everything. I believed her. That's what daughters do. For the first year, things seemed normal. I moved into my childhood bedroom temporarily to help Mom cope with the loss. I paid for groceries. I covered utility bills when her hours got cut at work. I told myself, this is what family does, you show up for each other, but slowly something changed in the way she looked at me. Small comments started creeping in. You're 24 and still living under my roof, she'd say, even though I was the one paying half the bills. Your father would be disappointed you haven't moved out yet. I brushed it off. I thought grief was making her say things she didn't mean. But I had no idea how deep this was going to go. One evening, about a year and a half after Dad passed, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder in her hands. Her face was calm, too calm. Rachel, she said, I've been looking at our finances and I think it's time you started paying real rent. Market rate. For your room. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. $1,200 a month, she said, starting immediately. And actually, for the last 18 months you've been here rent-free, I'm going to need $40,000 in back payment. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was kidding. She didn't. This is my house too, I said. Dad left it to both of us. Her expression didn't change. Your father left it to me, sweetheart. You've just been staying here out of my kindness. That's when everything changed. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom, staring at the walls that used to feel safe, wondering how the woman who raised me could look me in the eye and demand $40,000 like I was a stranger renting a room off Craigslist. I called my best friend, Megan, sobbing. She's talking about a lawyer, Megan. My own mother is threatening to sue me over back rent in my dad's house. Rachel, Megan said carefully, did you ever actually read your father's will? I froze. Truthfully, no. I'd been 23 grieving, and I trusted my mother to handle the legal side. I'd signed a few papers she put in front of me during probate, barely reading them, because I was drowning in loss and didn't want to think about paperwork. That night, I started digging through my old email, searching for anything related to Dad's estate. What I found made my stomach drop. Buried in an old email thread from the estate attorney, dated just after my father's funeral, was a document I barely remembered signing. It wasn't a waiver, like my mother had implied. It was an acknowledgement form, confirming that I had received and reviewed a copy of my father's actual will. I'd never read the will itself. I only remembered signing forms my mother handed me. The next morning, shaking, I called the law office directly. I asked them to send me a full copy of my father's will and the probate filing. 3 days later, the documents arrived. I sat at my kitchen table and read through them line by line. And there it was, clear as day, in my father's own carefully worded legal language. He hadn't left the house solely to my mother. He had left the house to both of us, jointly, as co-owners, with a specific clause stating that I could not be charged rent or removed from the property until I turned 30, to ensure Rachel always has a stable home during her early career years. My mother wasn't my landlord. She was co-owner of a house that legally protected me, and she had been managing the estate paperwork alone for years, likely counting on the fact that I would never actually pull the original documents myself. That's when everything changed. I sat with that knowledge for 2 full days before saying anything. Part of me wanted to scream at her immediately, but a bigger part of me, the part that had inherited my father's careful, methodical nature, decided I wasn't going to react. I was going to prepare. I contacted my father's estate attorney, Mr. Harold Whitfield, and requested a private meeting. I brought the will, the probate documents, and every text message where my mother had demanded the $40,000 back rent. Mr. Whitfield reviewed everything, then looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. Rachel, not only does she have no legal right to charge you rent under this clause, depending on how estate funds were managed over the past few years, there may be a larger issue with how she's handled joint assets. I asked what he meant. He explained that as co-owner, I was entitled to see the complete financial records tied to the estate, including any accounts, refinancing, or loans taken out against the house since my father's passing. I hadn't even considered that possibility. But now, I needed to know. For the next few weeks, I quietly gathered everything. I requested full estate records from the attorney. I pulled property records from the county assessor's office, confirming both our names were on the deed. I even found a refinance document from 18 months earlier, one my mother had never mentioned to me, where she'd taken out a loan against the house, using my father's death benefit as partial collateral, without informing me as co-owner. Meanwhile, my mother kept pushing. She sent a certified letter, formally demanding the $40,000 within 30 days or legal action would follow. She had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead of her. I scheduled a family meeting, the same kind of sit-down she'd used to spring her demand on me. Except this time, I invited someone else too, Mr. Whitfield. My mother arrived expecting to finalize her rent demand in front of a neutral third party, as I described it to her. Instead, she found her late husband's estate attorney sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of his own. "Diane," he said calmly, "before we discuss any rent payments, I think we need to review the actual terms of the will and the refinance you took out against this property 18 months ago." I watched the color drain from my mother's face. Mr. Whitfield laid it all out. The joint ownership clause protecting me until age 30, the fact that she legally could not charge me rent under those terms, and the undisclosed loan she'd taken against a house she didn't fully own without my knowledge or signature. "This isn't just a family disagreement anymore, Diane," he said. "This is a co-owner rights issue, and depending on how those funds were used, potentially a fiduciary one." My mother tried to argue, insisting she'd only been managing things the way Dad would have wanted, but the documents didn't lie. Every signature, every date, every dollar was right there on paper. In the weeks that followed, my mother was required to formally correct the property records, acknowledge my legal co-ownership, and repay the portion of the loan that had used my share of the estate as collateral. The $40,000 demand quietly disappeared, because there had never been any legal basis for it in the first place. She never fully apologized. I don't think she was capable of it. But she stopped bringing up rent, and for the first time in 3 years, I stood in that kitchen not as a guest waiting to be told to leave, but as someone who finally understood her own worth and her own rights. I moved out 6 months later anyway, not because I was forced to, but because I chose to. I bought a small condo across town with my share of the estate funds finally released to me. When I locked the door behind me on my last day at Maple Ridge Lane, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt free. Looking back now, I realize the hardest part wasn't discovering what my mother tried to do. It was accepting that trust isn't something you're owed just because someone shares your blood. My father left me more than a house. He left me protection, written in careful legal language because some part of him must have known I'd need it someday. I wish I'd read that will the moment it was given to me. I wish I hadn't assumed love meant honesty. But if there's one thing I want anyone watching this to take away, it's this. Always read the documents. Always know your rights. Family can disappoint you in ways you never expect, but the truth, when you finally find it, will always stand stronger than any lie built on top of it.